All right, you guys. So some of you know that I said that I created this 24-month Goddess of Social Work Supervision curriculum and wanted to go ahead and start that journey on our first supervision of the week in August. And what we're doing is on the compassionate warrior. So she's our first goddess that we're going to be covering over the next 2 years. The only person who's going to be with me the whole time so far is Renita, and we love that for her. But I wanted to record this because you guys are always connected to Circle. And if you ever wanted to just come back and re-listen to whatever we talked about during supervision, you'll have access to these recordings. So, but this week, our first week, we're talking about emotional boundaries. And so the prompt, if I can get us to move to the next slide, this week's prompt, and I put it a little bit of a snippet in the Zoom meeting, was I want you guys to bring a client or a supervision moment where you found yourself emotionally absorbing the other person's experience. And I literally wrote different words for emotionally absorbed, but taking on that client's experience. I'm going to probably give you an example that I had when I was thinking about this, when I was writing it out, was literally just now, right before we start supervision. One of my clients, she's a new mama, her baby's 3 months, and she was talking about the compulsion when her partner is doing something she would do a little bit differently. And I was like, I totally understand what you're saying. And so sometimes it could be a positive things, but sometimes taking on um, our clients' emotions can feel a bit overwhelming. I think here it is. I wrote when you are being flooded with the client's emotion, and you're like, oh, I totally get where you're coming from. And so I want you guys to bring this week. And if you're listening to this on the recording, you can put in the comments, bring to mind where you found yourself being flooded by the client's emotions, or when you found you were emotionally absorbing the other person's experience. And I'm curious what made it hard for you to hold the line. Was it just something they were saying that was like you really identified with it? But we'll get into what makes it so hard. So, what could make it hard when we are being flooded with the client's emotions or emotionally absorbing the other person's experience is empathetic over identification. Um, I wrote something down about that. You feel what the client feels to the point of overwhelm, right? You really are like, I totally get what you're saying, especially when it's a traumatic event and it's starting to bring back events that of something you knew or of yourself or someone you've known in your own personal life, and you are empathizing, overly empathizing with the client. Um, or it could be personal, like I was just saying, personal triggers or even your own unhealed wounds. The client's stories are echoing your own or somebody that you love, right? And that's why I always say that my favorite social workers or my favorite therapists are those who have therapists, or even the mantra in my email signature says every social worker, every good social worker has a social worker, because we're dealing with people's deep, dark stuff. And sometimes their stories are going to trigger us, or we're going to realize, I still need healing from that wound, or I didn't even know that was a wound. And again, that might make it hard to hold emotional boundaries with the client, because to me, social work is a journey, and we don't know the client that walks in, even if it's not through therapy, but it's through resource development or taking an intake or whatever, might say something that you didn't even realize was still a trigger for you, a personal trigger or a wound for you, that now you're being identified. I still need to do some work with that. I still need to do my own healing with that. And so that can make it hard then to hold the emotional boundary. Vicarious trauma from hearing client story after client story after client story. I feel like I've said this to you guys before, that I'll start a client, my 11, I start work for me On 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning, that's my start of the week. 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning, that first client, and then the next, and I usually see about 10 to 12 clients a week. The next 7 clients are telling me the same story. I don't know, it never fails. It's almost like this client had an issue with her mama, and then 6 or 7 clients after that have had issues with their mama, and they're traumatic stories, right? And so you're hearing the same story over and over, and you're like, I'm hearing this story over and over and over again. And that emotional wound or that emotional tap is being tapped on over and over and over and over and over again all throughout the week when you're dealing with your clients or serving the people that you serve. And so, one, you're finding yourself having secondary trauma because you're hearing the same story, even if it's by a different person over and over again, or vicarious trauma from hearing the same narrative. This is a big one. We have pressure to rescue or fix. I always talk to you guys about being Captain Save-A-Ho. For some reason, a bunch of social workers come into the field and we think we're supposed to save everybody. And so then that makes it hard to hold the line of emotional boundaries because we want to go in and and fix someone instead of reflecting or responding to that person clinically. We're like, let me problem solve. That's the big thing I've been hearing in supervision a lot lately is I just want to get to the solution. I want to just fix it for them versus just holding that space with them like, that sounds really difficult, or that sounds like that must have been really, really hard. We run into solution focused therapy versus just sitting in it with them or being, like I said, Captain Save-A-Ho. And then I was thinking about this one, the power dynamics in the room. And I've been reading this book. I don't see it on my desk now, but sometimes we want to withhold our emotions. One, we were raised in homes where the authorities, the parents, guardians in our lives, they withheld their own emotions. But what the sentence I wrote, it may feel wrong to withhold emotional connection, especially for newer clinicians or BIPOC practitioners who've been taught to prove their empathy, right? So it wasn't modeled for us how to just have really good boundaries with our empathetic responses. So we're like, oh man, that really is hard. And we really just go all the way with the client, all the way there with them. One, because no one ever did that for us. Again, going back up to the personal triggers or unhealed wounds. So we want to make sure this person sitting in front of us really knows that we are there for them. And so the power dynamics shift in the room because instead of us again responding clinically, we go straight there because of our own personal triggers and or unhealed wounds. And so some of the reflection questions, and I'll put these in our post and circle, but when do I first notice I've absorbed a client's energy? For me, I literally can feel it in my body. Like my heart starts to race sometimes, or my chest gets tight, or I feel like I'm doing the shallow breathing. Sometimes for me, and I've been doing this for a long time, so I do it over and over and over. So I'm really aware of where it's happening in my body. I even feel in the bottoms of my feet, the soles of my feet is when I'm noticing I'm taking on that client's energy. Another reflection question could be what part of me wants to cross the emotional boundary? Again, going back to I over identify with what this client is saying. Nobody's ever sat and held that space for me. Let me really hold this space for this client. And then we want to give that client what we probably never had ourselves. What cues, another reflection question is what cues help me to recenter myself? One of the things that I notice for me is when I'm doing a lot more talking than the client. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking way more than my client, or I'm not listening. I'm like, Renita, get back to what your role is. Again, role confusion with that rescue versus reflecting and responding. What cues help me to come back to myself is remembering what my role is in this interaction, right? And then I love to take 3 deep breaths, but we'll talk about that in just a second. And then again, what was I taught about showing emotion as a clinician? I hear over and over and over and over and over again, that we were taught not to show emotions, but the space that we've created, we've talked about how healthy it is to show emotion, that you are a human being. Yes, you're a social worker, but you're a human being. And this session today is going to briefly talk about having boundaries. It's okay to show emotions, but how can I have emotions or show emotions with boundaries? Okay. And then that's our last one. How do boundaries shift in client versus peer relationship? Is the client your client, or is your client your colleague or your friend? You know, I'm not your little friend kind of energy. So how do boundaries shift when it's your client versus it being a peer relationship? So some of the tools that I wanted to bring in is we've already kind of talked about. In For me, I feel this in my body. Where in your body are you holding the client's story, right? Um, I wrote something down like, where in your body are you holding the client's story, taking a pause and breathing? You don't have to absorb it in. You just are like, all right, that's their story. And let me tell you, one of the things, and y'all know I love my spiritual teachings, but one of the things that I learned this back in 2017, is that I need, I am intentional when I'm sitting down to have my session to imagine this imaginary, I'm like, I sit myself in this egg, right? It's like a bubble. And some days it's a pink shimmery bubble. Some days it's a clear bubble with little glitter on it. But when I bubble up is what I call it. I bubble up, then I can be present for the client without letting their story come into my body, into my own space. And so it's like a shield of protection. I need to have a visual shield of protection. Some people say, prayers before they enter into a client space or have a client enter into their own space. You can pray on your way to seeing a client. I'm a spiritual girly, so I'm going to say Psalms 23 and Psalms 91. But having something, some type of ritual or practice or method in which you are bubbling up in your own way so that you can hear this client story, but not necessarily take it on, especially take it on as a part of yourself, part of your own energetic frequency. I went too fast, sorry. Another tool is rephrasing. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm gonna get it. Checking with your body, bubbling up, but then language reframing. That's where I wanted to say language reframing. So sometimes we say, I feel your pain, right? Instead of saying, oh, I feel your pain, and then you really feel it. You're speaking that over yourself. You can say something like, I am witnessing your pain. And some of the other things that I wrote down, because I was thinking, what could be some alternatives of saying, I feel your pain, so that the client still feels seen and heard, but we're not literally and verbally taking that on. Is I noticed I was feeling their feelings as if they were my own. I blurred the line between empathy and over identification, or I was deeply impacted by what they were feeling. Again, we are human beings, y'all. And so you are going to feel what the client is feeling, but how can you speak it over yourself in a way that you're witnessing that they're having their own experience without you taking it on? Again, absorbing it as your own. Okay. And then finally, I saw myself in her story. So yeah, we do see ourselves, and I think that we are mirrors for each other. I think I mirror you guys and you guys mirror me. But again, how I said, my client at 11 o'clock, and then I have 6 or 7 other clients the rest of the week. Apparently, we are all mirroring each other and connected. So there is a part of the client's story or his or her story that you might see in yourself. And so I think the best social workers are those of us who can do self-reflection. And so what part of that story impacted you without you taking on um, all of their emotions, their trauma for yourself? Just say, this is the part of that story that really impacted me, and how can I focus on healing that within me? Because again, the other thing I believe with everything in me is we can only take our clients as far as we ourselves are willing to go. So if you notice something is impacting you and you're like, I don't have time to deal with that. That's them. That's not me. That client's going to stay exactly where you are in avoidance and ignoring it. And then you're going to be mad, like, why aren't they moving on? Why can't they just heal? Well, have you moved on? Have you healed? Have you practiced healing that part of you that they spoke about that impacted you? Us having to do the work. We have to do the work first, and then we can help guide our clients through it ourselves. I say this I say this one often, even to my client. I couldn't stop thinking about you after the session. I thought about you all week. That to me is a cue. What again about this client's experiences am I having in myself that I need to do some work on? And then being intentional about doing that particular work. Or even, and this is a big one, our programs have taught us we can't cry in front of our clients. I cry in front of my client. I do. I haven't in a while, but I have cried in front of clients. But I cried and I felt so unprofessional. And instead of shaming ourselves for crying, why were you crying? Again, what work in ourselves might need to be done, and or did it help bring build rapport with your client for them to see that, yeah, this is a tough situation. This is a sad, this is an overwhelming situation. And ask yourself, what did that emotion mean in your role? Did it open up for the client to feel even more safe and vulnerable in that space with you? That means you were very professional, because our job is to help the client get to the other side. And if your tears help them bridge to the other side of healing, then you absolutely are professional. And so then just finally, emotional boundaries aren't walls or, these fences we put up. They're doors with doorknobs that are on our side. And we get to allow how open, how far we want those doors to open. And we get to say when we want to close them. Like, yeah, I think I'm done. I think I'm just gonna let that be theirs, because it is theirs. And so this week, with emotional boundaries, this being our first week about us identifying with the compassionate warrior, let this week be about recognizing your door of empathy and how to use it with love and care. All right, you guys, thank you for letting me do this with you, and I can't wait to see y'all next week. Hold on.